spot right there. That's right here. The rock. That's how he was sitting. Oh, no. I was sitting here. Sit here. I was sitting here.
Yeah, he was sitting there. That's true. And then your dad asked him to get coffee.
Wait. That's mine. Why didn't you even spell your name? I can't spell my name. You can't even I can read.
It's kind of funny how when you're studying Torah, you really don't have time to look up jokes.
What?
I have no jokes for you, sorry.
What's that?
The Torah jokes.
I said, when you're studying Torah, you don't have time to look up jokes. And I'm sorry, folks, I have no jokes for you today. I can tell you what a mapach sounds like, but that's
A mapach, yeah. That's good.
It's really easy to limit your sense of humor when you don't have time to develop it.
I think there's a time and a place. It's a good thing to have a sense of humor.
I agree.
Mr. Kevin, please hold the scripts for us and castles out.
Bye-bye. The word I just... The word that's right here spells word. No, what is it spelled? It's a word that spells word. Leonard.
Yeah, good job. Another. Yeah, you got it.
First time you've ever seen it, really. What kind of thing?
Shalom.
Somebody left their light on in their van.
Is your light on your
I think your light is on in your van.
I know sometimes they'll stay on a little bit afterwards, but usually by this time you're out. Thank you for the reminder. I brought some stuff today. Yeah.
All right.
How about yourself?
I'm well as well. All's well that ends well. Wait a minute.
Excuse me.
All's well from Hashem.
You can have that.
Okay, guys, we are in for our Brit Chadashah study today, our study of the
Chapter?
New Covenant in light of the Tanakh and the Apostolic Writings.
No talk.
Starting in Luke chapter 9, I believe. Is that correct for everybody?
Yeah, chapter 9.
Chapter
All right, well, why don't we stand and bless Hashem for our time here. So, do we have a blue light? You grab the one back there, Karen, please. Kevin, please grab me. What's that? You good? You just got? Okay. Maybe we can pour one for Gidon and you have one yet too? Let's see, make sure you pour a few more of this. Good. Thank you.
Give that one to me.
To David here. Get an extra full one to Mr. Gidon here. And give that one to David. Good.
You have to give one to me.
Of course, you gave me the Bible that has the drop on the out again.
Yeah.
Is that? Oh, are you sure? Used to have like a twin.
Would you like to use mine?
Sure, they're great.
Yes, somebody is going to be.
Well, you might have heavy stone one left for that.
You are not.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher noten Torat emet u'besorot Yeshua le'amo Yisrael u'lekol ha'amim al-yedei bino Yeshua Mashiach Adonai. Amen. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe. universe, creates the fruit of the vine. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with commandments and has commanded us to be given us his Torah of truth and has given us his salvation through his truth, Messiah, his Son, our Messiah, and our Lord. We thank you, Father, for this time, for the study. We just pray that you would show us wondrous things, Father, from your emissaries, that you would hide these things in our heart and continue to draw us close, Father, and disciple us, Father. We just thank you and bless you. And it's Yeshua's name we pray. Amen.
Time
Yeshua. Well, bless Hashem for our food we have here today. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei minei mezonot. Amen. Blessed are you, Lord, King of the universe, who creates various types of foods. We thank you, Father, for your provision. We thank you, Father, most of all for your word, Father, which is true food indeed. We thank you that you're teaching us, Father, day by day, that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from your mouth. And it's Yeshua's name we pray. Amen.
Okay, so again, Luke chapter 9. And chapter 9, we have 62 verses. And those like to read along the table, we'll each read 5 verses. Calling together the 12, Yeshua gave them power and authority to expel all the demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. He said to them, take nothing for your trip, neither a walking stick nor pack, neither bread nor money, and don't have 2 shirts. Whatever house you enter, stay there and go out from there. Wherever they don't welcome you, shake the dust from your feet, and when you leave that town as a warning to them.
They set out and went through village after village, healing and announcing the good news everywhere. Herod the governor heard about all that was going on and was perplexed, because it was said by some that Yochanan had been raised from the dead, by others that Eliyahu had appeared, and by others that one of the prophets of long ago had come back to life. Herod said, I had Yochanan beheaded, so who is this about whom I keep hearing such things? And began trying to see him. On their return, the emissaries detailed to Yeshua what they had done. Then, taking them with him, he withdrew by himself to a town called Bethsaida.
But the crowds found out and followed him. Welcoming them, he went on to speak to them about the kingdom of God and to heal those who needed to be healed. The day began to draw to a close. The 12 came to him and said, send the crowd away, so that they can go and get lodging and food in the towns and farms around here, because where we are is a remote place. But he said to them, give them something to eat yourselves. They said, we have no more than 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we ourselves are supposed to go and buy food for all these people. For there were about 5,000 men. He said to his talmidim, make them sit down in groups of about 50 each. They did what he told them and had them all sit down.
Then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, made a bracha. He broke the loaves and began giving them to the talmidim to distribute to the crowd. Everyone ate as much as he wanted, and they took up what was left over, 12 baskets full of unbroken pieces. Once, when Yeshua was praying in private, his talmidim were with him, and he asked them, who are the crowd saying I am? They answered, Yochanan the Immerser, but others say Eliyahu, and others say some prophet long ago has risen. For you, he said to them, who do you say I am? Kepha answered, Mashiach of God.
However, he warned them. However, he, warning them, ordered them to tell this to no one, adding, the Son of Man has to endure much suffering and be rejected by the elders, the head clergy, and the Torah teachers. And he has to be put to death, but on the 3rd day he has to be raised to life. Then to everyone he said, if anyone wants to come after me, let him say no to himself, take up his execution stake daily, and follow me. For whoever tries to save his own life will destroy it, but whoever destroys his life on my account will save it. What will it benefit a person if he gains the whole world but destroys or forfeits his own life?
ashamed of me and my messages, the Son of Man will be ashamed of this one, when he will come in the glory of himself and the Father and the holy angels. But I say to you truly, that there are some of those who are standing in this place who will not taste death until they receive the kingdom of God. And it was about 8 days after these messages, and taking Peter and John and Jacob, he went up to the mountain to pray for himself. And it happened while he was praying, the appearance of his face was different, and his cloak was white, gleaming like lightning. And behold, 2 men were speaking with him, who were Moses and Elijah.
They appeared in glorious splendor and spoke of his exodus, which he was soon to accomplish in Jerusalem. Kepha and those with him had been sound asleep, but on becoming fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Yeshua, Kepha said to them, not knowing what he was saying, "It's good that we are here, brethren. Let's put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moshe, and one for Yaakov." As he spoke, a cloud came and enveloped them. They were frightened as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him."
When the voice spoke, Yeshua was alone once more. They kept quiet. At that time, they told no one anything of what they had seen. The next day, as they were coming down out of the hill country, a large crowd met him. Suddenly a man in the crowd shouted, "Rabbi, look at my son, I beg you, because he's my only child." What happens is this. A spirit seizes him, and suddenly it lets out a shriek and throws him into convulsions with foaming at the mouth. And only with difficulty will it leave him. It's destroying him. I asked your Talmudim to drive the spirit out, but they couldn't.
Perverted people without any trust. Yeshua answered, "How long do I have to be with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even as the boy was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground and threw him into a fit. But Yeshua rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. All were struck with amazement at the greatness of God. While they were all marveling at everything Yeshua was doing, he said to his Talmudim, "Listen carefully to what I'm going to say. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men." But they didn't understand what he meant by this. It had been concealed from them so that they would not grasp its meaning, and they were afraid to ask him about it.
An argument arose among the Talmudim as to which of them might be greatest. But Yeshua, knowing the thoughts of their hearts, took a child, stood him beside himself, and said to them, "Whoever welcomes this child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. In other words, the one who is least among you all, this is the one who is great." Yochanan responded, "Rabbi, we saw someone expelling demons in your name, and we stopped him because he doesn't follow you along with us." Yeshua said to him, "Don't stop such people, because whoever isn't against you is for you."
As the time approached for him to be taken up into heaven, he made his decision to set out for Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead of him, who went and entered a village in Shomron to make preparations for him. However, the people there would not let him stay because his destination was Jerusalem. When the Talmudim, Yaakov and Yochanan, saw this, they said, "Sir, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them?" But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. As they were traveling, did I go too far?
As they were traveling on the road, a man said to him, "I will follow you, wherever you go." Yeshua answered him, "The foxes have holes, and the birds flying above have nests, but the Son of Man has no home of his own." To another he said, "Follow me." But the man replied, "Sir, first let me go away and bury my father." Yeshua said, "Let the dead bury their own dead, and go and proclaim the kingdom of God." Yet another said, "I will follow you, sir, but first let me say goodbye to the people at home." To him Yeshua said, "No one who puts his hand to the plow and keeps looking back is fit to serve in the kingdom of heaven."
All right. Luke chapter 9. Any thoughts or questions or insights? Share?
Well, I guess the first thought that comes to my mind is the chapter begins with Yeshua giving his Talmudim power to cast out demons and to heal sick people, all in the name of the good news, right? The message. So this is how it's going to be demonstrated. However, the disciples come back and they're like, yeah, we did pretty good, and all of a sudden, boom, somebody shows up and says, hey, my kid here, I thought, your disciples could help him, but they couldn't. And the disciples are probably like, that's the guy. That's the guy that didn't work, and so Yeshua is like, all right, we're gonna handle this. But I guess the question is if he gave him authority over all the spirits, we know in some other, gospel it says, well, this one has to come out with prayer.
Right, prayer and fasting.
Well, yeah, that's added in other ones, but just prayer is the main word that they use. However, it didn't work, whether they prayed or not. It didn't happen for them, and that's just a puzzling question. They were given this authority, and this is one person who it didn't work with. So, any thoughts on that?
He's making it pretty clear that it's because of their lack of trust, not because of the Talmudim.
Yeah, he does seem to, he talks about it in other places. He says you were healed because of your trust. So
He says you perverted
even when it
people
comes to
without any
Yeshua,
trust.
in other places it says he didn't do many miracles there because why?
They didn't have any trust.
Exactly. So whether it be Yeshua himself or his Talmudim, he seems to put the, at least in this particular case, part of the problem. And I think that, we do have. We do have, Matthew 20, chapter 17, verse 21, where the text is included, where it talks about prayer and fasting. So that's something definitely to consider as well. But he does, in this particular account for Luke, the emphasis seems to be put more on the people's trust and the lack of it. And this is the reason why they're not seeing this miracle that they want to see.
This question.
Go ahead.
It says that they were going door to door healing and announcing the good news. What do you suppose they were saying as what the good news is?
Repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Yeah, Yeshua would in the beginning we see that the message of the good news that he was proclaiming was exactly that. Repent, which was teshuvah, in the context of turn from your lawless, Torahless deeds, and repent, turn to God, and we have this message of good news, the kingdom of heaven, he says, is here amongst you, basically. And of course we know, as we continue to read, and even in this passage, we see that Yeshua is proclaiming his death and how that's necessary. He's revealing that within some of this context. But I think that they, initially what we see happening is he's preparing the, just like Yochanan, the immerser, he was preparing the way for Yeshua. And how did he do that? Initially, there seem to be stages in which they're preparing people's hearts for the message of the good news. And the way that we know from the scriptures that Yochanan specifically was doing that was through Tevilah, was through baptism, the repentance of sins. And that is the very beginning of the message of the good news. And I think that primarily we see that message of repent, kingdom is coming, it's time to get right with God. As time goes on, I think that Yeshua is more and more revealing to them this full message of the good news. But as we see the emissaries later on further expound in the apostolic writings, but I don't think at this point, just because of the context of this chapter, that they were fully getting into the full, spectrum of what that message of the good news is. Because even in this chapter, this aspect of Yeshua dying, even though he is mentioning it to them, they didn't quite grasp it. So if his Talmudim aren't quite grasping it, how can they preach it? You know what I'm saying? But I think it was. Obviously this was, as we read the book of Acts, it's fully preached to all of Israel. It fully becomes revealed to them what this message of the good news is. It's just to fully receive. And I think that's the reason why it's the first part of the message of the good news. To fully receive the message of the good news, you have to humble yourself. And the only way that can happen is by repenting of your sins and of your Torah transgressions, where you're not going to receive Yeshua the Lord. Yeshua in other places says that if you will not believe Moshe, you will not believe me. So it's absolutely essential to the message of the good news. Kind of like we were talking about earlier yesterday in our study. The aspect of the Torah to the good news is essential.
Yeah, absolutely.
You muddy that, you muddy something pretty bad,
Well, what are you going to repent to? You're repenting from something to something. What are you going to repent to if it's not the Torah?
Right. How do you submit yourself to a Lord that you don't know? And in fact, Yeshua says, get away from me, I never knew you.
Right.
You workers of lawlessness. That's how it characterizes you.
Well, it's very clear, in America, when an immigrant comes to our country and wants to become a citizen of the United States, the first thing they start doing is they start studying for a test. And that studying has to do with history and law of the United States. And they have to understand, at least to a certain level, the laws of this country and how to be a citizen with good civic duty.
Yeah.
They have to understand things like how to be a jury member and who was the first president. And in fact, I think they actually have to name most of the presidents. They have to,
more than most.
there's all these things that
citizens.
it's important for them to learn before they become citizens.
Well, I think
But what's neat is that Yeshua just says, okay, turn from your old ways and start following this. So basically, if that were to happen here with an immigrant, they would walk in and they would say, okay, I'm no longer this.
Right.
I want to be American, and they would be an American. And then they could start learning the laws.
And yeah, exactly. I think that the message of the good news is even compared to our country is a little more simple.
Right.
In the fact that we just said simply, I think it's acceptable simply to identify God. God has a standard. We know what it is. We have a basic idea of what it is, at least. We know where it is. We know where to read about it.
Right.
So we can identify location and what we're supposed to study and what we're supposed to conform our lives to, even though that we don't know. It takes, decades for us to be a disciple in Yeshua and to see what that really looks like.
Well, truly, you don't fully learn it all in your whole life.
Yeah. How can you fully know a Torah that you haven't actually got a chance to actually experience?
Right.
Because that's the way you truly know it.
Mhm.
So you get a gist of what it is. Even now, we have a gist of what it is.
Right.
And right now, right this moment, and in the days to come, we're going to be really knowing what that is.
Right.
So even at Mount Sinai, he said, when Hashem is proclaiming the Torah, yet they haven't even heard all of it, he says, whatever you say, we will do.
Right.
We know where the source is. We know where we can find this Torah. We're going to, we know that you are our Lord. We know that you have this Torah. We've heard some things. We're agreeing to it. We're going to just, agree to submit ourselves.
Well, it's just like when you go
Do
to work
that.
for an employer, you say, okay, well, I'm going to do the job that you're putting before me.
Yeah.
And then they hire you, and then they instruct you. Pretty simple.
So they got a briefing of the Torah, like a sampling of it. And,
Sure, yeah.
And they sampled that it was good.
Well, the alternative was, cyanide dropped on their head.
Yeah, and they
In one
saw
aspect.
God's great wonders, and they got to experience part of Him.
Right.
Interesting thought. Whenever Yeshua told a parable, he would tell it. It was a story, it was eloquent, and it had meaning. And then nobody caught it. The disciples are like, "What was that?" And he would explain it to them because he said, "Well, for everybody else, they're going to see and not see, and hear and not hear, but you're going to get the understanding."
Mm-hmm.
Well, in verse 44, he says, "Listen very carefully to what I'm going to say." Now, this isn't a parable,
No.
but it's a statement. And he goes, "The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men." Now, he never told them, listen very carefully to the parables. He just told it like it was a story. But here, they're supposed to be listening really carefully, and somehow it's hidden from them.
Yeah.
The Son of Man is going to be betrayed. And I think they heard what he said. They just couldn't conceive it, that he's going to be betrayed, something terrible is going to happen.
I think there was a future purpose there.
Well, I don't-
he
yeah,
wanted them to hear it, but not understand it until after the resurrection, and then they would recall it.
Well, he was preparing them for it. He was slowly revealing some of this to them. What does it mean that he's going to be betrayed? I mean, This is, it says they're afraid to ask him about it. So they heard what he said.
Right.
They just didn't quite understand, what do you mean? I mean, they didn't.
They weren't afraid to ask about the parable.
They probably weren't for sure about, does this mean that he's going to die? I mean, again, we have this background of this expectation that he's here to reestablish the kingdom, and they're begging, they're pestering about it. So in their mind, this just does not compute. What does he mean? Does he mean, is there somebody in the 12 that's going to betray him? Does it mean, is all of his people going to betray him? But we do see, let's see, where else did we find this? Talked about the, there's something else that he says. Where is this? In chapter, I'm pretty sure we read that in chapter 9. Where is this? What else does he say here? Yeah, so verse 20, back 20 verses, he mentions something about this too. When he says, who do you say, he's talking to Ketuvei, he says, who do you say I am? And, after he asks him first, what people are saying about me, isn't he? And then Ketuvei says, the Mashiach, you're HaMashiach. And so then he says in verse 22, he is a little bit more clear here, where he says that the Son of Man has to endure much suffering, be rejected by the elders, the head of Kohanim, and the Torah teachers, and he has to be put to death, but on the third day he has to be raised to life. So then he cautions them that those who are going to follow him are going to have a similar type of a walk and fate, so to speak. So back down into 40, or rather in 40, what was it? In verse 44, it says, listen very carefully to what I'm saying. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed in the hands of men. So beforehand, he made it very clear. I was saying, well, maybe he didn't know about this death, but obviously he did say that, as I remembered, back in verse 20, something there. So what didn't they understand? What he meant by this? Because it says that he's about to be betrayed in the hands of men. Maybe they just understand exactly, how this was going to happen. They didn't feel like, they wanted to ask for details at that point. But obviously they were given information they understood, or they could at least hear the words, but they maybe just didn't quite grasp
they were afraid.
how this is possible. Why is this going to happen? Because of their expectation of the Mashiach,
Yeah, they're probably in a state of confusion because they're thinking Mashiach's going to push Rome out and give Israel back their land. And yet now he's talking about being betrayed, and they're probably just like, what? No, I don't get it.
We see another instance of this with Ketuvei. Remember this? Where we see, kind of what the confusion is. I think he probably represents the confusion about what they're having a hard time understanding. Because they wanted to see him set up the kingdom, restore the self-rule to Israel, as they've asked him literally before. And it's in verse, what is this? Matthew 16, Mark 8. If we go to Matthew 16, in verse 21, so from that time on, Yeshua began making it clear to his Talmudim that he had to go to Yerushalayim and endure much suffering at the hands of the elders, and the head Kohanim and the Torah teachers. Pretty much what he said exactly here in the passage, and that he had to be put to death. But on the third day, he had to be raised to life. And so I think we see an expression about what their confusion is and Ketuvei says, "Heaven, be merciful, Lord. By no means will this happen to you." So again, this is not their expectation of what the Mashiach. It just doesn't make sense to them. What's the point?
Right.
Why? Well, we don't understand. So
this is something that I don't know. I'm curious. Is this something that's very unique about Yeshua in the sense that every other figure of the Mashiach, to the Jewish people, from what I understand, at least from what I've read, none of them ever claimed that they would suffer, especially prior to any suffering that they went through. They all just said, we're going to take over, and they were trying to lead the people to a revolt, or they were trying to lead people to them. And,
In that day, yeah, especially in that
but
day.
none of them ever said, hey, you know what, I'm going to get betrayed and killed, and and he's telling them before it even happens. That's unique about Yeshua, that he knew, I'm going to die, and then I'm going to be raised again, and then I'm going to come back again in another day.
Well, there's a lot of fervor and a lot of confusion. Obviously in that day, we didn't have a whole lot. What I've read historically, we didn't have a whole lot of people claiming to be Mashiach, yet they're going to die and suffer on behalf of people.
Because people wouldn't follow him.
But and we do have several different examples of messianic figures in the Torah and the Tanakh itself that they could look to. One of them, of course, would be Moshe, which is they're looking for a Moshe type, Mashiach, who is going to
deliver them.
He's going to deliver them. There's going to be great judgments against the occupation and against Rome, and he's going to establish Israel, like in its glory, like we see beginning to happen with Moshe. But of course, they also have to remember, and they probably lost sight of because of everything that's surrounding them that's happening, is that they have Yosef also as a messianic figure, which was during that time well known as a messianic figure. Although even some of their expectations kind of tainted that as well, because you have the title Mashiach ben Yosef, right? Yeshua, the Messiah, the son of Yosef, which is patterned after Yosef in the Tanakh, where he would suffer, and then it was only through his suffering, through his betrayal, that he would raise to be in this high position of leadership and save his brethren.
Right.
But even then, in a lot of Jewish tradition, this Mashiach ben Yosef is still a military type of a guy that's fighting this battle, but he ends up dying, and then basically Mashiach ben David picks up the torch, so to speak, from there, avenges him, and then essentially finishes.
But that doesn't match Torah.
Well, I know, but this is just Jewish tradition. So even Mashiach ben Yosef, even though he's known as the suffering one, because he in Jewish tradition he will die, he's still a revolutionary type.
Yeah.
So
my question is just real quick on the whole issue of, a little off subject, but the issue of Mashiach ben Yosef. I'm just at this moment seeing a parallel between the prophecy of the famine and the prophecy of the feast, like that there would be this time of great reward, and then after that would be this great famine. And if we look in Revelation, it talks about this time of when things are going to go really well, and then we're going to go into a state of tribulation. And Yeshua makes that same prediction, and that's just fascinating to me, because like right now in America, at least we're at the precipice of our feast. We're feasting. We got everything going good for us, and but I think there's coming a time where it's going to be a famine.
I think so.
And I think we're going into a time of a famine of Hashem's word, where people, they carry this Bible around with them, but they never read it. And so, I think the more we store this up in our hearts, the less we're going to suffer when that time comes.
Amen. Yeah.
There's something in this chapter also where it talks in verse 23. He says, everyone, he says, anyone wants to come after me, let him say no to himself, take up his execution stake daily, and keep following me. And then we see that there's a couple of people who say, I want to follow you. And then they all have, well, but first I got to go do this. And to one or two people he says, follow me. And they all have a reason why they just can't do it at that moment, But I think that's the message that everybody needs to hear today is, are you following Yeshua? Are you following him? Or do you have to go do something else first? Is there something else on your agenda before you can completely, because it wasn't like the person at the very end who, at the very end, what was the last guy here? He said,
I'll follow you, sir, but first let me
say goodbye.
To people at home.
Say goodbye. And then he says, well, no one who puts his hand to the plow keeps looking back. So, what is that person who's keeps looking back? Who do they represent? Somebody who, well, first of all, if you have a plow in front of you, you have a straight course to be on. You're on the path of keeping the Torah, you're keeping the mitzvot, you're doing all this, you're studying, And if you're looking back, you know, you're turning your head to the left, you're turning to the right, you're not focusing anymore on your path.
Right.
And you can get off track real easy. And you can't be worthy to even give the good news of the kingdom. You're not fit to serve anymore because you're not focused, and you're just, you know, you're just going here, going there. And you can see that sometimes today with various, you know, people who say, oh, I love the Lord, I want to follow you, I want to do all this, but, you know, they're going to the left, they're going to the right, you know, looking behind them, oh, man, they're talking about, oh, I remember the good old days, and this was like this, and, you know, they're not looking ahead anymore, so.
Well, I think also this is specifically talking about a Talmud, somebody who wants to dedicate themselves to being a disciple of Yeshua, to walk foot for foot behind him, and, you know, dress as he dresses and speaks as he speaks. If they're trying to do that and be what they used to be, it's not going to work.
Yep.
It's like Lot's wife, you know, she turned back and looked back at him, at Gomorrah or Sodom, or whichever one it was, both of them.
Today when
She turned into a pillar of salt.
When I was reading this, something just popped into my head when, in 59, he says to another, he says, follow me. And when the man replied, first let me go away and bury my father. And there's a lot of speculation on what, you know, what he really meant by that, and how some people could say, well, his dad wasn't dead yet, you know, he was probably going to die in 5 years, and that's when he was planning to follow him. However, Yeshua didn't say that. He just says, let the dead bury their own dead. Now, my question is he saying that this guy's dead right now? Because if the dead bury the dead, right? That means somebody who's dead. So he's not alive spiritually yet. So he hasn't really grasped this good news either. He's just there, but he hasn't totally accepted it into his life yet.
I don't think he was talking about him, though. I was thinking he was talking about maybe the rest of his family that might not be
No, I'm just
seeking
saying,
him to
I'm
follow.
saying the person who says, I got to go back and bury my dad, and then Yeshua says, let the dead bury their dead. He could have sat there and said, well, what is he trying to say? You know, because the way I saw that, it was like the guy's dead spiritually. He's not alive yet. You know, when you accept Yeshua, you repent, you have a new life. You're a new creation. So this guy wasn't a new creation yet. He hadn't repented yet. He's being offered it. Follow me. He says, let me go bury my father first.
Right.
You know, so he hasn't. You know, he's following. He's with all the other people who are listening to the word, and they're amazed at what Yeshua was saying, but he's not ready yet. And, you know, just like some people, maybe tomorrow I'll decide, you know, maybe next week, maybe in a...
Well, and I think if we look at this from, at least as much as we can from Yeshua's perspective, Yeshua is looking at eternal life. He's looking at a kingdom to come where there's no wickedness, where there's no idols, where there's no man treating man terribly. And I think, you know, deep down inside, Yeshua is excited about this and wants people to be excited about it. And he's looking at this guy going, you're worried about burying your dad when this kingdom that's coming, and you can learn about it, and you can follow me, and you can be a part of that? You know, what are you thinking? Let the dead bury the dead, you know? Maybe I'm wrong, but I think Yeshua knows what's going to happen, and I think if we knew what he knows, we wouldn't even hesitate, even for a second, to follow after him. So I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, there's as usual there is a Jewish context to this.
Oh, let the dead bury the dead. Is that an idiomatic phrase, or?
Well, there's a Jewish background, you know, to this. There was in Jewish culture during that time there was what is called the double burial. And they would wait for the flesh to actually, you know, decompose, and they'd actually rebury the.
Wouldn't they take the bones out of the grave and put them in a sarcophagus and put it into a tomb?
Yeah.
Because I know they found Caiaphas' bones in a sarcophagus with no flesh on them, and strangely, 2 Roman nails that they were able to identify as crucifixion nails, which is really odd. They were in a sarcophagus. Yeah. There's a very long, very interesting documentary on that. It's pretty fascinating. Now, you know, what that means, they still couldn't establish, but They definitely could establish that they were crucifixion nails in his sarcophagus.
Yeah, so there is the there is that context actually. There's that Jewish context. So, well, I think there's several ways we can look at this. For example, Mikhail was talking about the spiritual aspect. There is indeed the Jewish background to this, in the quite possible situation where he's saying, listen, wait till my father's burial process is complete before I start following you, because as my son, I have a responsibility to do this in my culture,
Yeah. So basically, he had a responsibility to go back, dig up his dad's bones, and put them in a sarcophagus, and then everything would be settled enough for him to be able to follow Yeshua. In that sense. It's kind of creepy when you think about it. He's saying, "I'll follow you when my dad's flesh rots." Pretty grim.
Well,
when cows fly, right?
Well, no, I mean, obviously his dad's flesh is going to rot off the bones, but it's like,
he's going to be an old man himself.
Right.
Well, the point, I think the point is that Yeshua's saying, if you love father and mother more than me, you're not worthy of me.
Right.
And so it's not as if it would be a bad thing to want to do that, because in Judaism, showing honor for the dead is
right up there at the top.
Huge. It's one of those acts of loving kindness that is considered so high because they can no one can pay you for it.
Well, it's the ultimate loving your neighbor as yourself.
So, I mean, it was if you were to bring up an excuse, it would be a seemingly good one, to the in the Jewish mind. But Yeshua is kind of using the height of excuse. And he's saying, listen, there's no excuse.
Still doesn't, yeah.
This is what I see from the Jewish
That really makes sense, yeah. I can see the power in that.
It's obvious 12 people said yes.
Yeah.
The 12 of them that said yes are the ones who are truly following him.
Yeah.
There's literally hundreds that followed him all over the place that weren't part of that 12.
Mm-hmm.
That's why a lot of times the Pharisees would say, tell your Talmud to stop doing this, or tell them to stop doing this, or do something about it.
Well, there was like
Correct.
70 Talmudim that turned away, didn't they? When he was talking about
the ones that he sent out on a.
No, there was like 70 of them that actually turned away from him and wouldn't follow him anymore. Or there was a multitude of Talmudim that after he had said something.
Well, when he mentioned about eating his flesh and drinking his blood,
that's what it was.
That's when
they turned away and they said, "Yeah, we're not going to."
Couldn't continue to. Yeah. But this is the case here. Was just a few people who they're all on the spot. That the light's on them. Either follow me or they say, I want to follow you, and then he tells them something, and all of a sudden it's like, this was all nice and easy when I didn't have to be on the spot. I was just one of the people in the crowd listening to your great teachings, and your, it was great, but now we're face to face, and that's what's going to happen. We're all going to be face to face with Yeshua.
Every time we consider these things, we should remember what Kepha said, Shimon Kepha said, when he said, who else is there to follow? I haven't, there's nobody else. You're it. You're the Mashiach. Why would I?
Where are we going to go?
Where am I going to go? You're all I got. There is nothing else. So he saw something that I think we all need to see, and there's only one path, and it's a narrow path. It's a narrow path because it only leads to Yeshua. That's it. There's nowhere else it goes, and you have to walk on the path that he walked.
Right.
And you have to deny yourself, and you have to take up your execution stake, and you have to do the things that he did to be his Talmud.
There's a commentary that expands this concept of the dead burying their dead that I'd like to share. And this is just conjecture, but this is one interpreter that goes into the same kind of the background that I was talking about earlier. And there may have been some misunderstandings, how you have a tradition that gets started. This is how generally the tradition works. And not only in Judaism, but just across the board. You have an initial tradition that starts in one generation. The next generation looks at it with a new set of eyes. They start expanding. They start adding a little bit more information and meaning to it. The next generation takes a little bit farther, and then you get one generation with wild hair, and they're just like, "Whoa, this! I'm going to show you something new and powerful about this tradition you guys never knew before."
Kind of like milk and meat.
You know, and then they say, "Look at this is what this means." And like they're like, "Whoa!" You know, it kind of gets.
Yeah, gets out of control.
Anyways, so while it could have been initially a acceptable tradition to do this, there's been some things that have been attached to it later on. I'll just read just a few notes here. It says, after the body was placed in a burial cave, it was left to decompose. The family mourned for 7 days, that's sitting Shiva. And this initial mourning period was followed by a less intense 30 days, that's Shloshim. However, the entire mourning period was not fully over until the flesh of the deceased had decomposed, usually about a year later. That's usually when the ceremony for the tombstone takes place.
Huh.
Still in Jewish tradition. I don't hear a whole lot of these taking the bones and doing that in this day, but there's still remnants of the tradition. Talmud Yerushalmi states, when the flesh had wasted away, the bones were collected and placed in chests, ossuaries. On that day, the son mourned, but the following day he was glad because his forebears rested from judgment, and that's in Moed Katan, in the Talmud Yerushalmi. The final act of mourning, the gathering of the bones into a bone box called an ossuary, was called an ossulegium, or secondary burial. It is an act, I believe, that is in the commentary here, view of our Lord's response. For good discussion on secondary burial, see Myers, 1971. He lists a lot of sources here. The disciples request Yeshua, and Yeshua's response makes good sense in light of the Jewish custom of secondary burial. When the disciples requested time to be buried their fathers, they were actually asking for time to finish the rite of secondary burial. Their father had died, been placed in the family burial cave, and the sons, that's at Shiva, and most likely Shloshim. They had requested anywhere from a few weeks up to 11 months to finish the ritual of Ossulegium before they returned to Yeshua. And even to this day, there's Jewish customs that, for someone that has died, if it's like your father or, your first removed relative, that there's certain things you're basically in Jewish custom and law you're forbidden from doing. Going to celebration, parties, there's this certain prior period where you don't even shave your beard at all, or your hair, other things like that take place, and which certain endeavors would get in the way of. This all ties into all of this here. The fathers had been buried in the family burial caves, and their bodies were slowly decomposing in the tombs. Along with the fathers were other family members who had died, some awaiting secondary burial. Other family members, they're already dead. When Yeshua stated, "Let the dead bury their own dead," he was referring to two different kinds of dead in the tomb: the bones of the deceased, which had already been neatly placed in ossuaries, and the fathers who had yet to be buried. The phrase "own dead" indicates that the fathers were included among the dead. The setting of the saying, he says, the Gospels record two incidents where disciples approached the Lord to request a leave of absence from following him. The first request is recorded in Matthew 8. Yeshua was about to take the 12 across the Sea of Galilee to the Decapolis in the city of Gadara. Chronologically, this trip is the first recorded journey of Yeshua to minister in Gentile territory. One of his disciples hesitated, probably because he did not want to go to those unclean, non-kosher pagan Gentiles. So he made an excuse: let me first go and bury my father. He most likely appealed to the Jewish burial practice of ossulegium, or secondary burial, which would remove him from following the Lord for up to 11 months. So this was usually a legitimate excuse. Yeshua saw this as an excuse not to minister to the Gentiles, as well, this is what the commentator here is suggesting. As a result, he rebuked him with a statement of irony and challenged the disciple to follow him. Quite possibly this was a Kefa, because he is known to have had a problem associated with the Goyim, the Gentiles, initially. The second incident is recorded in Luke chapter 9, verses 59 through 60, which we're reading. Another disciple, possibly one of the 70, was going to Yerushalayim for the Feast of Sukkot during the fall of AD 29. He asked to be excused for the same reason. It may be that this disciple was taking advantage of the pilgrimage to Yerushalayim in order to bury the bones of his father in the holy city. If so, Yeshua felt it was more pressing for him to go with the 70 to Perea than to rebury the bones of his father in Yerushalayim. And then he makes one little note. Why would Yeshua respond in a seemingly harsh manner? This is just another conjecture, which may have merit. The purpose of his response may have been twofold. The first purpose was to encourage the disciples to faithfully follow him. The second purpose, and perhaps more importantly, was to teach correct theology. The concept of gathering the bones of one's ancestors is deeply embedded in the Hebrew scriptures and reflected in Israeli burial practices.
Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. Genesis 49:29, Judges chapter 2, chapter 16, 1 Kings chapter 11, 43. There's lots of other places. This is an important issue. However, by the New Testament times, the concept had taken on a new meaning, as I was mentioning before. For example, you have just the simple tradition of washing the hands. The most ancient explanation is that, hey, the Kohanim, we're following the example of the Kohanim. We're a priesthood, nation of Kohanim. And
Eventually turns into washing demons.
and suddenly, generation, you have this has something to do with demons making you clean at night. It's just like, it's just one example of how crazy it can get over the generations. And in fact, not all the Jewish people even accept all of this. Like a lot of the Jewish people to this day reject a lot of this Kabbalistic practices. Even stuff like, for example, with Tashlik. For a while there, almost all Judaism banned the practice of Tashlik because eventually someone came along and started attaching these spiritual bad theologies to, throwing the bread in the water and shaking off the bread from your clothing, and then eventually they allowed it, and they just shunned that understanding of it and just maintained the original place in the Tanakh that talks about these type of things. And anyways, so he goes on to say, however, by the New Testament times, the concept had taken on a new meaning. According to the rabbinic sources, the decomposition of the flesh atoned for the sins of the dead person. You guys catch that? According to rabbinic sources, and some rabbinic sources, the decomposition of the flesh atoned for sins of the dead person, a kind of purgatory. And the final stage of this process was gathering the bones and placing them in an ossuary. Yeshua confronts this contrary theology. Only faith in Messiah, redemptive work on the cross can atone for sin, not rotting flesh or any other work or merit of our own. Yeshua may have rebuked these two disciples rather harshly because they were following the corrupted practice of what had become a corrupted practice of the second burial. Not that, again, there's other passages where this is what they would do. But that particular thing had become corrupted. Just like if the Nehushim, the snake on the pole. Oh, right.
Yeah, they start worshiping.
In the beginning, it's kosher, right?
Right.
Later on, they're like, oh, you know what? I know this happened, but guess what? It's a god, actually. You see? It's a god. And then, of course, after that, they're like, okay, we got to put the kibosh on that. So that's another thing to consider as far as just Jewish background.
There's a good Torah example of why we need to be careful when these traditions go awry.
Yeah. So, but based on that, understand that Jewish background, that Hebraic background to the story that's going on here, things like what Michael says still would fit with some of these things. Understanding all of that, you could easily understand the concept of those who are spiritually dead, even with the physical things that are actually being practiced.
Yeah, absolutely.
But worthy to know, it's worthy to understand, at least, with a grain of salt.
So they all get into a discussion. Could be an argument. I think they were just discussing amongst themselves. Which of them might be the greatest? And I guess that could be important to them. However, I don't know why it would even come up because they have the greatest with them. Day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the greatest would have to be somebody who would be like Yeshua's successor, because that'd be the only reason why they would want somebody to fulfill after he leaves them, Somebody has to, take his place. So they're discussing who could it be, and I'm trying to come up with a good idea why they would even want to do that, but I just can't come up with one, because aren't they getting humbler, as they're following Yeshua? Aren't they starting to see things the way he sees them because they're his disciples?
I think the more they suffer, the more they suffer as he did, the more they become humble. As a matter of fact, I think that they reach a true level of humility after Yeshua is crucified. Their leader's gone. Then even when he is raised from the dead, and thereafter as they are sent out, they suffer many, many things. And I think at that point is when they truly start to understand what Yeshua was talking about when he says, "You will suffer many things as I will." Mm-hmm. And I think that the purpose for that truly is to bring them to an honest state of humility. And I think suffering, fasting, whatever it is that you have to go through in life that's hard, God puts that there for the purpose of humility, so that you can have that heart of being completely dependent upon Him.
There's a few things going on here. I think that's one of them you mentioned. Is he's using this as an example of teaching humility, but this is always a caution for any community of brothers. Where you have some type of a organization and order to it all. You never want to get yourself into a position where you start envying somebody's other position, or you are scared about what might happen or what position they might acquire, or where you are and all that. That's Yeshua's teaching us. That's the wrong perspective. The perspective that we should have is, no, how can I serve? How can I excel as a servant here? And let's not be scared about what's happening with these other brothers,
right,
or what might happen with them. You know what? It's just Yeshua says in other places too. That the servant will be the greatest among you, and that is the way of true succession and leadership within the kingdom of heaven. And, what part of it could have been just a legitimate logical understanding, because they think Yeshua's going to set up the kingdom. Well, the kingdom's got to have order. We've got to have magistrates. Let's figure this out now, guys. Come on, let's get going, because we're ready for the kingdom to happen.
Right.
And if we don't know who everybody's going to be in the kingdom, then
And Yeshua's saying, "Come on, guys, I want you to serve."
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I think like we were talking about at that leadership meeting. I think the only excusable position you could be in, as far as desiring a position of leadership, would be with a heart of, look at the opportunity I have to serve. If I'm in that position, look at all the chances I will have, the opportunities I will have to serve God and to glorify Him. That would be the only reason you would desire that.
And to encourage other brothers and
exactly,
and build them up,
and to bring them into a position like that.
And be in a unique position to elevate them.
Exactly. Bring up the bar.
Yeah.
Don't lower it. Bring it up.
Yeah.
So He uses a child to bring this to light.
Right.
He uses a child because these guys are like, hey, we're grown men. All of a sudden Yeshua's like, hey, take a look at this kid. Anybody who receives this child in my name and welcomes me, and they're welcoming the one who sent me, this is the person who's great. Now, He didn't say they're the greatest. He says they're great. And I think if you look up the word great and you look up the word greatest, they're similar in meaning, but when He says great, it has a lot more meaning to it. Where greatest, this has like one particular meaning. It doesn't really carry a whole lot, which is kind of like if they thought they were the greatest, then they weren't really that much. But if you're great in Yeshua's eyes and in the Father's eyes, then there's a whole lot more that goes with that. So I want to be great in Yeshua's eyes. Not that I'm seeking that, but I'm just saying that's what we should attain to.
Well, like I talked on the a couple of Shabbats back, it's the idea, I think, of being submissive and being, and like a child. When you have a child, they know that you're a child. They know that there's authority over them. This little child sitting next to Yeshua, he's like, yes, whatever you want. Right. Is the idea, and not those who are rebellious or so puffed up they can't follow Yeshua's.
Again, a position of
humility. They can't be discipled.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like we read earlier in Luke chapter Luke, he was talking about issues of discipleship. Mm-hmm. And those who didn't make good disciples and those who did. Remember that? Yeah. And so I think that's partly what Yeshua is trying to get across here. It's like, you guys, careful about getting puffed up. You need to, the ones who are going to be the leaders are going to be not only, of course, servants, as he said in other places, but those who are going to be true disciples. Because how can you guys need to be more concerned about discipleship than you are leading right now.
Right.
Is basically, I think, what he's trying to teach. Yeah.
Well, it's like in the military, they say a good leader starts out being a good follower. Right. Well, that's what a disciple is, a follower. So if you're a good disciple, then eventually, God's going to say, I need to make you a leader because you know what a good follower is because you were one. Yeah. So you can find good followers.
It's the same thing when he's talking about, to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must become like this little child.
Right. Yeah.
So Yochanan and
you'd be impressionable.
Exactly, yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
The two who want to be called fire down, They might have been one of the two that wanted to be the greatest. You never know. And think about it. What happened? They got rebuked by Yeshua.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, how could we have?
Maybe we could be like Eliyahu.
I think we gotta watch what we say around Yeshua. He might rebuke us, you know.
Let's call the flamethrower angels.
Well, it's like we read in John chapter 8, you know, they're saying, tell us if you're the Messiah, and they're expecting all this, you know, this revolutionary type of person, and so his disciples, they're thinking back to, you know, to the great prophet,
Yeah.
Eliyahu,
Right.
that we read about in the beginning of Melachim Beit, right?
Yeah.
Second Kings. Because they know they know he's a great individual. I mean,
Well, and they know that Eliyahu was a type of Mashiach.
Yeah.
So with the Mashiach's coming, then obviously things are going to happen like with Eliyahu.
well, yeah, exactly. So they're acting in faith,
Right.
but they're just a little misguided and they don't quite understand what's going on.
They're kind of Rambo in it, yeah.
And you know, Yeshua's, he is, although he's getting frustrated with some of them, you know, and some of their misunderstandings and things. And later on, even after he dies, what does he say to them as they're walking down the road to Emmaus? It's like, you guys should know this stuff. It's in the Tanakh.
Right, yeah.
You know, so, but he starts to reveal it to him.
Well, it's neat. God expects us to have patience,
Yeah,
and oftentimes we don't. So He has patience for us,
yeah.
and that's kind of neat.
Well, he's a good father.
Right, absolutely.
And a teacher must be patient.
Well, we want our
According to
children
the
to
scriptures,
we want
yeah.
our children to have patience. We want our children to wait and see the big picture. And often our children don't see the big picture. Like, you know, why can't I drink all the milk? Well, because we need some for tomorrow, you know. And so we want them to have that patience, but they don't always get it right away. So we got to be patient for them and just go, you know, I'm going to wait, and I know one of these days you're going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what Yeshua is doing with his Talmudim.
Of course, we also see the.
But he still instructs them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, he keeps them accountable, as we are to do. We see also where he is transfigured. Where was
Yeah, they want to build sukkahs for him.
Yeah, exactly. So,
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they were expecting, they're expecting the kingdom to come, and Sukkot is representative of this coming kingdom.
Right, yeah.
The Feast of Tabernacles, I mean, reference Zechariah chapter 14, yeah?
Yeah, they're like,
You
this
know?
is the new Sukkot. This is, you know.
Yeah, it's happening now.
Right.
And Yeshua's like, well, of course, Kepha says he doesn't really know what he's talking about. 'Cause
Right.
It's not happening now.
Right.
But they're getting a taste of that, you know. And they're getting a real taste of that coming kingdom, you know.
Yeah, well, especially the cloud starts enveloping them,
And I think that when Yeshua is talking about in other places where he says, some will not taste of death before they see the coming of the kingdom. I think this is possibly what he's talking about here.
Oh, right, yeah.
He gives them this taste of this coming ruling kingdom. You know, they actually get to see the first fruits of this, and indeed they believe it's. They believe that is exactly what's happening. That's why he's going to
That'll
build
be a
these tabernacles for them.
That'll be an incredibly.
Because they're like, hey, you guys are here to stay. Yes.
Right.
I wondered if the guy, Yochanan, you know, and he said, hey, Yeshua, you know what, we stopped this guy from casting out demons, you know, because he wasn't like following us, you know. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this could have happened on the, you know, on the tail end of them not being able to cast out that other demon. They're like, this guy's casting out demons. No, wait, stop him, he's not one of us, he's not one of the 12. 'Cause he didn't actually send 13 out, he sent the 12 out to do this.
Right.
And there was somebody else doing it, you know, maybe he was somebody who was listening to all the things that Yeshua was saying. Obviously, he had to have the Spirit of God working through him to do it. You just don't, well, at least I would think that. And what did Yeshua say? He said, if he's not against you, he's for you.
Well, and
So-
it's not only that, but
Don't
the
stop
individual is doing it in Yeshua's name.
Because he said, basically said, you know, don't forbid him from doing this.
Yeah. But it says, Rabbi, we saw someone expelling demons in your name. So although he wasn't traveling with them, he wasn't within the inner circle of the Talmudim, he was putting apparently trust in Yeshua's name.
Oh, yeah.
And Yeshua's like, hey, take what
trusted
I'll
me,
take
yeah.
what I can get.
Yeah. They're not against you. Right.
Yeah, it's like, what's so bad? I mean, he's giving me props
He
here.
wasn't worried about being the greatest, that's probably why he was worried.
Glorifying God. What's the problem?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, That may be later on in the letters, when they mention, that he who is for you is not against you. That may be they're kind of drawing from that teaching from Yeshua.
Yeah, if someone's not against you, then there is room for
relationship.
For relationship and possibly networking.
Right.
Don't burn a bridge before it has a chance to get built all the way.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think is the significance of Yeshua meeting with Moshe and Yaakov on the mountain?
Oh, good question. There's a lot of significance to that.
What was the question?
What is the significance to Yeshua meeting with Moshe and Eliyahu on this mount where he's transfigured and he's given his shown to be who he is in his glorified state? Well, I think that it is everything is established by 2 or 3 witnesses in the Torah. So and specifically we have examples of heaven and earth being even witnesses, which I think represents, in one way or shape or form here, the Torah and the prophets. Prophecy is this heavenly, word that comes from Hashem, and the Torah is for life on earth here. And so, anyways, I think that we see that in Moshe and Eliyahu, out of all of the individuals in the Tanakh, the Moshe definitely represents the Torah, and Eliyahu definitely represents the prophets. They're considered par excellence when it comes to those 2 areas. And so we have the Torah and the prophets witnessing this Yeshua is this coming kingdom and ruler, Messiah. I think that another thing too is that I think we can see parallels to this in the book of Revelation, when we see the kingdom is being established in the future, and we have these 2 witnesses. Again, they're called 2 witnesses. So when we see these 2 with Yeshua, they're witnesses to Yeshua. And again, I think they're representing the Torah and the prophets. But they do similar things that only Moshe and Eliyahu do, in the book of Revelation. I think that it's not only just the simple idea of the Torah and the prophets, witnessing Yeshua, but in the end, the Torah and the prophets are going to be judging the earth. The Tanakh is going to be, it's all representative of God judging the earth according to the Torah and prophets.
And what's such a huge blessing about that is, where's the first place that we find grace in the Bible?
And the Tanakh is the greatest source of it.
But it's only those who have a repentant heart that are the ones who are given grace, even in the Tanakh. So it really shows the attributes of God through that. Right?
Amen.
Great grace. Grace beyond understanding.
I kind of wonder if it was around the time of Sukkot, because the
Could've
word
been.
here in the Greek, it's sekunos, or sekunos.
Yeah, I think it was quite possible. I don't think it would have to be, but
Yeah,
but I think it's a good possibility.
It could have been Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah. No, I don't think so.
There's my joke for the day. Take it or leave it. Unlikely, but possible.
So yeah, any other questions before we close here tonight?
Kip says, should we break out the mariachi band?
Well, I guess I would have a question.
Sit down.
Is there any significance to why, when they were feeding 5,000, that he had them sit in groups of 50?
I was thinking about that too earlier. That's interesting you bring that up. I was thinking of the 50 days to Shavuot.
And then they took up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces.
A basket for each of the disciples?
That's the total.
Could be.
That is an interesting thing to think about. So if you have 5,000 people divided into groups of 50, then you have 100 groups. There's another number
Yeah, 100 groups.
to think about.
Yeah.
But
And then 12 baskets of leftovers, one for each of the disciples. Possibly.
yeah,
And they
I think it
all
was.
ate as much as they wanted.
I know. Yeah, they were full. So do you think they said Birkat Hamazon when they were done?
Well, I don't know. I think that there's God is a God of order, for one. There may have been something advantageous to the area that they were, to organize themselves into groups like that around Yeshua. But as far as the numbers go, there, I'm not sure exactly if there would be any other significance. Any thoughts on that, Tommy?
No.
The closest thing I could come up would be the counting up to Shavuot. That maybe there's some spiritual significance to that, but I think that's weak at best.
Yeah, 50.
Wasn't there like something later on when Yeshua was trying to explain something to the disciples and said, "Didn't you understand, the 5 loaves and 2 fish?" And like they didn't get it, and it had something to do with the number.
Well, that's when he's talking about the leaven, and he says, "Watch the leaven of the Pharisees." And they're like, "That's because we didn't bring any bread with us." He's getting on our case. That's a different story.
Yeah, maybe it's maybe I don't know. Maybe he's organizing them into like battalions type of situation. You have maybe he's considering them. Maybe it's a way to kind of say that these are his Tovot, his hosts.
Yeah.
Before him. I think of examples here, like in let's see here in 2 Kings. It draws to mind 2 Kings to me, where the king is sending these battalions of 50 to Eliyahu. Right? So we have Eliyahu in this picture. We have the 50s, and they keep on coming in 50s. It's just like one 50 came, and then 60 came, and then 70. It seems like they're in like verse 2 Kings chapter 1 verse 9. Then the king sent a commander of 50 to Eliyahu together with his 50 men. Of course, they got we have fire coming down. So, anyways, I'm connecting this because we have all these elements in our story, don't we?
Right.
Fire coming down, Eliyahu's appearing.
Right.
The 50s.
Groups of 50.
There's 3 different elements that seems like it's begging you to connect them together somehow.
Yeah.
So, anyways, 2 Kings is where as my mind searches the Tanakh, this is where it would go. Although I don't quite understand it fully. But as you continue to read, and it says, then King sent another 50, and then the king sent a third commander of 50, and so they're always in 50s. So maybe these are Hebrew battalions.
Could be.
There seems to be some interesting connections between the 2 Kings chapter 1 and the chapter.
That'd be more like a platoon.
Whatever, yeah, I don't know. I'm probably using the wrong military.
Yeah, 50 people would be like a platoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like sending a platoon out on patrol or something.
Yeah, so maybe this is representative of his Tovot.
These are his platoons for his battalion.
Yeah.
I think what he did was
He's
he
getting
looked
ready to
out.
army.
He looked out and he did that thing that Rain Man does. He goes, 5,000. Okay, 50.
Yeah.
50, 55,000. Okay, we're good.
It's interesting.
All the toothpicks.
It could be just coincidence.
Well, here we go. The
Fire.
Rain Man,
Yeah.
toothpicks.
The
Toothpicks are made of trees. Trees are men.
So it's all Hebrew, right?
You want to think if there's only one connection, but maybe something to study out further. Maybe there's
Something to keep in mind.
Maybe there's
at
nothing
least.
at all
Yeah.
in there. Would that be close to Brit tonight?
Finally getting thanks for this time that we were able to study your new covenant. We ask that you would help each of us to have within our hearts your good news, ready at any moment when we have opportunities to share it. Help us to be your lights. Help us to not put it under a bushel. And let us always remember that counting the cost is something that we all do every day, but it's worth it. You did everything for us, so now we can do everything for you and serve you with our whole hearts. We ask for protection as everybody's traveling home tonight. Would you lift up Kathleen and anyone else who is not feeling well, whether it be family members here. We just ask for protection and healing in Yeshua's name. Amen. They were.